training new analysts, which is where, oh, there we go, thank you. That's better, which is where the idea for this talk has come from. So, why do SOC analysts need to worry about storytelling? Well, put simply, everybody loves a good story. And by allowing our readers to be able to get a greater insight into some of the threats that we face today, we're able to get them to better understand some of the issues that we face in terms of securing our estates and to be able to better protect their assets, environments, etc. We come across some excellent stories in our field, but unfortunately we could be a little bit better at telling them sometimes. I'm sure many of you probably have experienced as well, if you're already working within the industry, that one of the greatest challenges we face is actually getting the buy-in from either our clients, managers, also as well some of the other professionals we have to work with, but definitely the end users. And I think sometimes we can use our reports and better leverage those to be able to go ahead and really help them to understand and prioritize why we need to do some of these things, why we need to take some of these measures, why we need to implement some of these controls. And indeed, when they decide to go ahead and click that link that they probably shouldn't have done, why we have to go ahead and take some of those remediation steps as well. But I think most importantly, our reports, when it all boils down to it, that's our call to action. That's us saying, these are the steps that we need you to take. These are the things that we need you to do. And this is why we need you to do them. And now, sometimes. So, before we kick off, I wanted to show you an example of a report here that really just has some of the areas that could be improved that we see some of the time. So I don't want to draw too much on this text, but just take my word for it here. We've got missing timestamp. It's one of my favourite things. We see it a lot. And the reason for this is you're telling somebody, we've got this really bad thing that potentially happened, but when? Obviously that's a really important detail that gets overlooked surprisingly often. And a little pro tip for those of you who do work as SOC analysts or would like to, when you are working with particularly some quite involved incidents where you've got quite a lot of events, it can be really useful, and particularly if you're working across multiple time zones, to use UTC for your timings, or at least to kind of create a uniform converted timeline, so you've got a cohesive timeline of events as well. Otherwise it can get a little bit difficult to follow for your reader as well. We've also got some assumptions here. It's great to say, that we've got this likely expected activity for a user, but for those of you who are SOC analysts, you'll probably know that we're probably the most likely group of people to go ahead and get our laptops infected with malware. So saying something's likely expected is always a little bit of a risk. And the other thing, it's a little bit ambiguous and could be clarified that little bit better. So we want to move away from something like this to something that's just a little bit more detailed, a little bit better contextualized, and a little bit clearer. How do we do that? Well, hopefully I'm going to help you answer that question today. So first of all, the biggest thing, in my opinion, before you do anything, before you write any report, is knowing your audience. So who are you writing for and why? What do we need them to know? What do we need them to do? And what do we need them to understand? Secondly, context is your friend. It's your absolute best friend, actually, when you're writing any kind of report, because it's like I said with the timestamps, it makes such a difference to have all the relevant information ahead of you. That's the thing that's going to stop someone coming back to you and say, hey, can you give us more information? And it's going to be so much more efficient, and it's going to save everybody so much more time. And then finally, this one's for you, is to build your own knowledge base. And that comes down to just moving away from that kind of copy-paste approach, or relying on things like the AI, generative AI, chatbots, things like that, and being able to really rely on your own knowledge and skills. Because let's be honest, you've got it. So make use of that, and make sure that you can draw on that knowledge and those skills to be able to add that context and add that value in the reports you're writing. So, firstly, knowing your audience. Well, what does that actually entail in practice? Well, you might be thinking, well, as me standing up here saying, not all of your readers will be technical experts. You might be one of the lucky few who is writing predominantly for technical experts, and that's great. That's fine. In that case, the same logic applies. You can tailor your reports to that audience. But if you're not writing for technical subject matter experts, and you'll find that's often the case, and even if you may not realize, because sometimes you might not intend to write for someone that isn't, but by the time it gets passed on to somebody else further down the line, it may be that particular person isn't someone who's worked in a SOC or done a cybersecurity master's degree. So it can often be better to assume that your reader has minimal to possibly even no subject matter knowledge. So we don't want to patronize them at the end of the day. I'm sure they're lovely, perfectly competent people, but they're not professionals within our field. So we ideally want to try and avoid any kind of unqualified jargon, any unqualified abbreviations as well. And to add in any descriptions of any complex technical concepts as well that we're discussing. And it can always help to add some links to either documentation or any other reliable references. And that's something, even if you are writing for subject matter experts, that can be really useful as well. I know personally if someone does that, I absolutely love it because it makes my job and the job of anyone else reading it so much easier. Now, just a brief reminder on this one to mind your language. I'm sure nobody is out there thinking and writing in their reports, oh, mate, it's completely shafted. But just a quick reminder, please do keep it clear, professional, and unbiased as well. So it's just a couple of best practice pointers here. The other one is to keep it concise and to keep it relevant, because at the end of the day, you don't want to lose your reader because of the length of text they're having to plough through to get to the important bits. So secondly, we've got this arguably, I would say, most important point when it comes to the actual production of your report. And that's that context is your friend. But what does that actually mean in practice? Well, it's really quite simply that the simple details are often the ones that matter the most, but they're often the ones that are very easy to leave out. So, what actually happened at the end of the day? And the other one I said that's often left out is when. So those timestamps that we see, they actually really do matter. And that can help us to put together and piece together a cohesive timeline of events that really can make the difference between determining whether something may be malicious or perfectly expected. So these timestamps really do make a difference. Again, something very important to consider is who is involved, but that might also mean what other entities and assets were involved. So, again, really important context. We want to make sure that we're including in our reports. Where did it happen? The event. And the other thing that to keep in mind is it might not necessarily be the same as where things actually originated. And how do we make sure that we actually include all of these relevant details? Well, it can be really helpful to work with a structure. I know that some of you may be dictating, that did not work very well in practice on here, did it? Well, I'm sorry about that. Because, that did not work. I'm sorry about the slides there. I don't know how that happened. We'll blame the lovely Linux machine. Sorry, guys. Anyway, what I'll do, for anyone who wants a copy of the slides, just my details are going to be at the end, and please feel free to get in touch and I'll send over a clean copy with everything on the actual graphic there. So we've got a potential structure here that would have been up on the screen that has the investigation process, and that can actually be a really good place to start when it comes to structuring your investigation notes or your reports. So first of all, I like to start with the validation of the alert, if you like. So what actually happened? We've got why did the alert trigger in the first place, for example. Again, brief overview of those really key contextual points. That can be a really good place to make sure you've got those in nice and early doors. And just really go over the real essential details, what actually happened, why, involving who and what, and when. Then move into the kind of meatier parts of the investigation itself. If you're looking at a more formal report, then maybe looking a little bit at the methodology, the investigation steps, for example. Then following that, we'd go on to looking a little bit of the findings. And I like to personally include the evidence within that because I think for the end reader, that makes it a lot easier to follow. And it's just so much easier if you can look at it. We found this, here's the evidence, rather than having that kind of in different sections or something. But obviously if you're dictated to a different structure, that's absolutely fine too. The most important thing is to consider screenshots over URLs every day, because I don't know if you've ever seen on VirusTotal, the report, it changed from a lovely wall of green to a sea of red overnight. You've been warned. Generally then, we would consider the scope. So this is meant to be that lovely purple one at the bottom there. So the scope is where we would consider the pivot of our investigation. So is there any evidence of lateral movement, privilege escalation? And also really, is there any kind of unidentified earlier events that hadn't been picked up by alerting, or any subsequent events that may be relevant to our investigation as well, just to give an indication of the scope of the incident potentially, or any sort of related activity that may be relevant. And this is also where we might look at, if we were doing a formal incident report, we could then also go ahead and do some of our impact assessment at this sort of stage. Then ideally, we would move on to a brief conclusion, just kind of really highlight what matters most about our findings, with the beauty of the findings we have from our investigation and the knowledge we have from that. But also, we could probably then put in a nice, clear, useful statement about the classification. Is this actually a true positive to be concerned about? False positive that needs addressing? Or is it benign activity? Then, if it is true positive, I would include a nice, clear statement about any remediation steps taken, with evidence, if possible, just to show what's been done up to this point, so everyone knows what actions have been taken. And then, finally, a next steps and a call to action for your reader with any immediate actions that need to be performed, but also any sort of future actions for the reader as well. Finally, we have our build your own knowledge base. This one is for yourself. If you have your analysts that you're already working in that role, this one is very much for you. So really, instead of relying on other tools or copy and pasting from previous reports, the idea is just to put in the work, use your own research, use your own knowledge and experience here, draw on that, and make sure that you're actually able to provide that context that only we can really use to add that value. Because at the end of the day, what's stopping the client from going ahead and chucking it into ChatGPT and writing their own reports? Wouldn't that be horrible? We're the ones that can add that value. So, top tips, know your audience, context is your friend, and again, build your own knowledge base. That's what's going to make you a better analyst in the longer term. So we've got a brief example here just to finish off of a much more contextualized investigation summary. Don't worry about reading the details. Again, I'll get you the slides if you want it. The key take-home point is that there's much greater contextual detail. There's also much more evidence, including confirmation of the activity. And as well, we have a brief conclusion with a very clear classification statement stating that, again, no further action is required because the activity is benign. So, we've reached the end of our talk today. Sorry again, and thank you so much for your patience at the beginning. But if there's time for any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If not, please do go ahead and look me up on LinkedIn. I don't have a nice QR code because the temptation to rickroll you would just be too great. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time with me this afternoon. You've been absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you so much to the team at B-Sides and to my mentor, Javad, as well. I really appreciate it.